Gospel of John, chapter 1. And just reading a short section, famous section, John 1. I'm going to start reading in verse 10. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Nolan shared with me the theme that you're having in this Easter season. And he mentioned this question: how do we look at a hurting world and not look away? And it hit me like a ton of bricks, Nolan, on the phone. It's something Kelly and I have wrestled with. Because we have looked away. We know what it's like to look and to look away. And I'll say this right from the get-go, the durable solution that we've come up with is to look closer. How do you look at a hurting world? How do you face a hurting world and not turn away? You have to look closer. Kelly and I mentioned to the kids, met in a Bible school which really promoted world mission. That was the epitome, the greatest calling you can ever get. And that suited us just fine. We sort of saw ourselves as international type people with a lot of overseas experience in our backgrounds. And that was our goal. And probably the smartest thing we ever did was submit ourselves to a local church and not just run off and do our thing. And we told the church, a little small church in New Brunswick where we pastored, that we had this vision, we had this dream. And we said, so we'll see what God does. And we'd like you to be a part of our sending. And 6 years later, that church sent us, along with our convention, with Canadian Baptist Ministries, to work in Somali ministry in the Horn of Africa, based in Kenya. And we went with a lot of idealism. If there's one word that would describe us back then, that was 95, 96, idealistic. And Africa hit us hard, knocked us off of our feet. The chaos. That was the first thing that came into my mind when we landed in Africa, up into the Somali part of Kenya, in the town of Garissa. I remember that was the first Somali town we got to. Chaos. Dirt. It was just a society that just didn't seem to work, didn't seem to be in sync. It was like every man for himself. We had our first run-in with thieves, and everyone trying to get for himself, look after himself, and that was something from the top down, from the president on down. We lost count of how many times we've been robbed. Our first day in Dadaab, as they were welcoming us to our new house, this little house, which looked like the Taj Mahal in this village, though it only had 2 rooms. And we were being welcomed there. We were sort of in the courtyard there, and then there was this procession, this huge mob that came outside the gate. And even our Somali friends were like, "Whoa, what's that?" And they went out to find out what it was, and they were carrying a man to the hospital, and he'd been macheted by his wife. What kind of a place is this? And And you know, we soon found out that he probably deserved all he got. And we were in shock. There was a drought at the time. And I don't know if there's anything that tests your faith more than a drought. The heavens dried up. Not a drop. And there's been increased cycles, shortened cycles of drought. We saw disease. We got sick ourselves. Thought we were going to lose one of our daughters with malaria early on. I was helping some people, so we had one of the few vehicles in the town. They asked me to come to the hospital and carry a mother who had given birth and the baby had actually died. And we carried this poor lady who could hardly walk and got her into the vehicle and took her out to the outskirts of the village to their compound. And as they were getting out of the vehicle, they're trying to help this lady down. And so they just handed me this bundle. And I looked down, and it was the dead baby. And I found myself, it just happened, you know. We'd had a sheltered existence up to this point. I did a webinar the other day, taking part in a webinar on vicarious trauma, compassion fatigue. Because really, God was merciful to us. He protected us the whole time we were in Kenya. We saw some terrible things happen to people we loved, and worked with people who were in trauma, refugees. And so there's this thing called vicarious trauma. And I think we were sufferers of that. And one of the things that I learned in the webinar is that you can have a worldview switch. When you get hit with the realities of the world, or at least some of them, when you're not looking close enough to see the others, but when you get hit with some of the realities of the world, it twists your mind. And all of a sudden, I used to believe in a world that was God's world, and this is my Father's world. He is the ruler yet. And I started to doubt that. Nick Ripken, one of our speakers at Jesus to the Nations, mentioned this. His journey was similar to mine. Someone said, when you go, look for God. I'm not sure, I guess I didn't do a good job because I didn't see him. When we were there doing September 11th, 2001, and we were so cynical, and by that time, our response, along with many other Africans, was to New York City, welcome to the real world. This is the reality that most of the world lives in. And we've tried to look away. And there was no joy in that either. So what are we to do? How do you look at a hurting world and not look away? The incarnation tells me that you have to be there. You have to be there. Jesus made his dwelling among us. The message says he moved into our neighborhood. When we landed in Dadaab, this Muslim village, coming out of a church culture, we felt like fish out of water, and at the same time, we found the air breathable. It was like we were meant to be here. Something came alive in us, even though it was so hard. We're in the world. God wants us in the world. He came to the world. He said, as the Father sent me, I'm sending you. He wants us there. We have to be there. And when we're there, if we're there, we allow ourselves to be there, to go into the places we'd rather not go, into the relationships we'd rather not go. That's when you see God work. In those early years, I said there was a drought. Nick Repkin said, I was living in the Old Testament. I felt that. That's exactly what I said. I'm living in the Old Testament. One day, a flock of birds came over that area of Kenya. There were people who were so hungry that they were snaring sparrows, Sudanese refugees who had no ration cards. They were the poor of the poor in the refugee camps. And they were snaring sparrows. God sent a flock of birds over the camp. Today there's 500,000 refugees still living there. And the town is 5 kilometers away from the first camp. And even over this flock was so large that even in the town, these birds decided to land. And because of the drought and their fatigue, they couldn't take off anymore. They were quail, guinea fowl. And we ran around and caught them. And the Sudanese had meat, and they were Christians. They knew their Old Testament. God was there. Just the joy of that church was incredible to experience. I'm not convinced that we always did and said the things we should have said and did do, but I am convinced we were where we should have been. We were in God's world. And people even got to see God in us, miracle of miracles. Just little things even. I just remember one Somali man saying to me after years there, he said, you know what I've learned from you? I said, what's that? He said, you treat your children like people. And I became a really bad parent there, all the stress. But that's something he had noticed. Another friend, Musa, he was in one of the pictures. He said, I want to have what you have. I want to have what you have. It wouldn't have happened if we weren't there. Next point, be in relationship. Be there, be in relationship. Life is relationships. The Godhead is relationship. The DNA of the universe is relationship. We sang about holy, holy, holy. The Trinity. And as you're there and you get close to people, I'll never forget this one. Back in 2001, after September 11th, after the U.S. retaliation, when there was a total shift in thinking, the people went from shame and disgrace over what had happened to anger, and Osama bin Laden became an underdog, and they lined up to join. I was in a restaurant, very tense times, and I was in a Somali restaurant, all men there, and this man, a tall man, majestic, kind of regal kind of character, long beard, and his prayer beads, white camise, and he came in and he went right to me and sat down right beside me. Very unusual. Everyone turned. What is this guy? And this man looked at me and he said, do you think I'm Osama bin Laden? And he was speaking Somali. He looked like Osama bin Laden. But it was Somali, an older Somali man. And I knew what he meant. Am I stereotyping him? Am I putting him in a box? I said to him, do you think I'm George Bush? And we all laughed. And everyone in the restaurant, we just laughed. And it was a moment of humanity. And this man said to me, amidst laughter, he said, Beni Adam Banahai, we're all sons of Adam. Relationships are what's so important. One of my closest relationships with a fellow called Muhammad. We helped him. I was really afraid that he was a believer. I was really afraid he was becoming maybe too dependent on us. I mean, he's just full of needs, medical, you name it. And sometimes I just felt I can't help you with this, Muhammad. You're on your own with this problem. You're just torn. You don't know when to help, when not to help. He said, I don't like that answer. But he said, whenever I'm tempted to doubt your love for me, I remember how you let me sleep in your bedroom when I was recovering from surgery. You and Kelly gave up your bed and your bedroom for me. And he is still walking with the Lord, Muhammad is. He lives in Columbus, Ohio. And but we learned about relationships. But you get hurt in relationships. You hurt when you go to the places you'd rather not go to. And we've been hurt. Kelly cried every day our first year in Africa. We're deeply disturbed by the problems. You know, when it says that Jesus was moved with compassion. We talk about Passion Week. Passion means suffering. Compassion and suffering go together. You will be hurt. The week before we left Kenya, a year and a half ago, Musa, the one who said to me, I want to have what you have. And I just feel like I didn't communicate the way I should with him. And if there was ever a seeker, he was it. And he died. Suddenly died. I was with him. And there's a lot of hurt. Just a month ago, another friend, Abdi Weli, was assassinated in Garissa, a Somali believer. If you hurt, you're alive. I'm glad I still hurt. But then there's a blessing. There is a great blessing. I took a missionary friend up to the village of Dadaab. We arrived, and a Somali lady came running with a thermos of tea and brought us tea. And we sat down and we drank tea after the journey. And my colleague, he wasn't with Canadian Baptist Ministries, but he was with another mission, and he was a great guy, actually, a wonderful guy, but somewhat agenda-driven, and they'd actually been kicked out of the town they were in. And he was in shock. He said, I have never been served tea before by a Somali. And that's what a blessing to have friends, to be in relationships. They cause hurt, but there's also blessing. Kelly physically and emotionally crashed at one point, ended up in hospital. And you know, we went to serve, we went to help, we went to do, to be the saviors, and here we are, helpless. One of our colleagues came to the hospital to visit her and brought a number of Somali women with her. And they gathered around the bed, and they started praying for her. And Kelly wanted to be praying for them, but she couldn't. And she just had to lay there and receive their prayers. What a blessing. My close friend, Yatani, he's a national field staff with Canadian Baptist Ministries. Incredible friendship that God gave us. I visited his father's home way at the Ethiopian border. They're nomads. And they presented me with this milk jug. And it's my prized possession. And it was sort of a farewell present to me. If ever we have a global meltdown, an economic crash, I'm okay. I have family to go to in northern Kenya, which will probably be untouched by it all. We are blessed with friends there. I know that the answer on dealing with a hurting world is to be there, is to be in relationship, is to be hurt, and is to be blessed. It's because of what Jesus went through. Whenever I'm somewhat overwhelmed by how dark or how surreal, how hopeless, how evil a spot on this earth is, I remember that Jesus planted his feet on this earth and announced the good news. The kingdom of God has come, has touched back down, and it's going to spread. He was in a womb. He was in a barn, a baby in a barn. He was a refugee fleeing infanticide and genocide. He was a body in a tomb. He was here in this world. And as a resurrected Lord, he didn't shake the dust off of his feet. But he remained. Came to his disciples, found them when they weren't looking for him. And he said, I'm not going to leave you as orphans. I'm going to remain in the world with you. And through you, I'm going to continue to go to the dark places of this world. Palm Sunday is all about Jesus setting his face to go to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and murder those who are sent to you. He knew where he was going. You know, the Islamic calendar begins in 622. It was the date of the Hijrah, the flight from Mecca. Muhammad fled persecution in Mecca, went to Medina where he was more well-liked and where he built up an army, and returned to Mecca. But our calendar starts with Jesus setting his face to go to that dark place. He was in relationships. I love Luke when it says, and he went back home with them and was subject to them, to his parents. God was subject to his parents in relationship. He loved relationship. He called 12 to be with him. He had lots of relationships. And we mentioned about the Trinity. That's the source of the DNA of the universe. And how it's an eternal dance. And Jesus stepped out of that dance, and the Father let go of his hand so that he might bring us back into the dance, into relationship. Jesus loved relationships. Even on the cross, said to his closest friend, look after my mother. He did relationships well. And he was hurt. He came to his own, and his own received him not. We often focus on some of the physical things that happened during the crucifixion. The slaps, the insults, the whipping, the nails, the piercing. But Scripture actually gives most of the text to the betrayals, to the denying, to the fleeing, to the aloneness. The loss of relationships was probably the most hurtful thing to our Lord. And Jesus was blessed. Worst thing in the world in Africa is to die without children. Isaiah says, and who can speak of his descendants? He was cut off from the land of the living. To die without children is to be truly alone, is to be truly mortal. As in African thinking, you sort of continue to live through your children. Your seed goes on. He died alone. He died without children. But then Isaiah 53 goes on to say, though his life is made an offering for sin, he will have many descendants. He will enjoy a long life, and the Lord's good plan will prosper in his hands. To those who received him, he gave power to become children of God. Jesus is blessed. Here I am, he says to the Father as he comes back into the dance. Here I am and the children that you have given me. He won us back in. He considers himself for a joy set before him. That was his relationship with you. He is a blessed man for having come to the earth, looked at it, got close, looked close. Today I'm going to visit a refugee family. They're no longer a refugee family. I don't know when you lose that title. Maybe once a refugee, always a refugee. They've lived in Canada for 15 years. Live in Bedford. We got to know them in EFO refugee camp. We didn't suffer. I don't think we've ever suffered. They've suffered. But we were there together. And there's something about when you suffer together. There's a bond. There's a closeness. I can always go to their home. We have something in common. When you look at a hurting world and don't look away, you have a fellowship with Jesus. Paul said, I want to know Christ, power of his resurrection, and the fellowship of sharing his sufferings. I just encourage you to look closer, to get closer, to be hurt, and to be blessed with that fellowship with Christ. The Lord be with you.